In Chapter 4, you finally get an explanation for some features of verbs and nouns that you've seen several times in the reading. This will be a long chapter. I suggest you take a break after we do verbs and come back fresh for the second half with respect to nouns. Note first, there's a bunch of vocab here. Learn it all. It's a lot. Make sure you're doing flashcards, make sure you're memorizing your vocabulary. The first major concept covered in this chapter is the verbs. Particularly, you get the full paradigm presented to you that you have so far, although you should, there it is, good. So the full paradigm here, o ace a, amen eta use. So I loosen, you loosen, he loosens, we loosen, y'all loosen, they loosen, right? Then both imperatives, loosen, lue, lueta, y'all, plural people, loosen, and the infinitive, to loosen. Then you get contract verbs explained, which is nice because you've been seeing these a bunch. The short vowels epsilon and omicron will contract with other vowels. They're only explaining here the epsilon. Also, alpha contracts, but we'll learn that in the next chapter. But epsilon lengthens everything that can be lengthened by one step. So you add if you have a verb, the stem of which ends in an epsilon, then you're going to attach these different endings to it, right? Amen eta oas a, amen eta use. We're attaching that to the epsilon. Vowels that are next to each other are going to combine in weird ways. So o combines and just consumes the vowel, which is typically, we just see the epsilon disappear. But, and likewise, epsilon iota combines and just stays epsilon iota. But just an epsilon, like in the imperative ending, which is just the epsilon, that combines to create an epsilon iota diphthong. So you get epsilon plus epsilon equals epsilon iota. Epsilon plus omicron is maybe the one that's least intuitive, and that is you lengthen the omicron one step to oo, the diphthong omicron upsilon. So note that one. That's the one that maybe will throw you the most. Something like amen is going to be lengthened to umen, right? That sort of thing. Okay. And so pay attention to that. There's some examples they give you. I guess they don't. Yeah. Yeah. So those are your basic contracts. The epsilon combining with other vowels to lengthen them. Basically, epsilon plus epsilon is epsilon iota, and epsilon plus omicron is epsilon upsilon. That basically covers it, actually. Now, for declensions. A declension is not a category of meaning. It is just a pattern of spelling. So you've already learned that nouns have case, gender, and number. And these are syntactic categories. They will affect its meaning, although gender here is a little dubious, but let's just say it for now. Case and number tell you if it's singular or plural. That communicates meaning. And case tells you what it's doing in the sentence. And then there's gender, which is kind of a grouping. But so case, gender, and number will all be categories of meaning. Declensions tell you nothing about the meaning of a word. When you learn that a noun is a first declension or a second declension or a third declension, you learn nothing meaningful about that word. All what you learn is that its genitive is going to be formed in a predictable way. Its dative is going to be formed in a predictable way based on its declension. So it is just a way of grouping together nouns that are spelled in similar ways. This chapter teaches you first declension feminines, and in the second half, first declension masculines. So we call these both first declensions because they're spelled very, very similarly. Outside of the nominative and genitive, they're spelled basically identically. So they're all first declensions. The nouns you've already learned, omicron sigma nouns and neuter omicron nu nouns, masculine and neuter respectively, those were all second declension nouns. So they belong to a different group of spellings. And this first declension group, well, let's meet them. We meet for our first time some feminine nouns. first of all, they're going to have their own set of articles. And again, these articles will be your friends. You need to memorize them. They tell you they're going to stay stable no matter what declension we're in. So this feminine singular nominative will be the same whether we're talking about a feminine noun in the second declension, and those exist, or a feminine noun in the third declension, and those exist. So the nouns here are very helpful. The articles here are very helpful. Hey, tace, te, tain, vocative. Hi, tone, tice, toss. You'll want to memorize those. And if you memorize those, you've basically, with a little quibble, you've basically learned the endings for these first declension feminine nouns. So, krine, krines, krine, krinen, right? Krenen, I should say. That's your noun there, and that is fully declined in the singular, right? Likewise, in the plural, we've got hi, krenai, ton krenon, tais krenais, and tas krenas, right? So you have there with the adjectives here interposed. So you have there your article and noun combinations, which you will need to know well. Accenting stuff, you can look over it, don't sweat it. The wrinkle you should sweat is that some of these first declension feminine nouns, which are all supposed to be exactly the same, have alphas instead of etas in the singular. Hey hudria is the example they're giving here. And they tell you the rule is that if the stem ends with an epsilon, iota, or rho, you don't put an eta after those letters. You put an alpha. So the plurals are the same because the plurals already end with an alpha. See? Krinai, krinon, krinais, krenes, krenas, krenai, right? So those stay the same, which is nice. But your singulars here all change from etas, krenai, right? Krene, over to alphas, hudria, hudrias, hudria, hudrian. And you'll notice there's a real ambiguity here. Tes hudrias versus tas hudrias. If only there was some way to tell the difference between these two nouns that are spelled exactly the same. Oh wait, there is. It's the article, right? So learn the articles. The genitive singular and the accusative plural are identical for first declension feminines that start with alpha, except their articles aren't. The articles will always help you disambiguate. And then there's this third mixed group that are just basically annoying. These are ones that start with alpha, even though they don't follow the rules, and then switch to the eta for the genitive and dative. Because languages are not predictable. Because that's how big Greeks talk to little Greeks. Okay, so you've got your first declension feminine group. We're now going to learn the first declension masculine. There's a type 4 up here. Yeah, it's the same. It's the same thing. Don't sweat that. Read it, but it's just a difference in vowel length. Okay, first declension masculines. Now, these are still part of the first declension. So they're still part of the same group of spellings. So they're basically going to be the same. Check out those plurals. Despota, despotai, despoton, despotais, despotas. Good. Those are exactly the same as the first declension feminines. But they're masculine, so look at the articles. Hoi, ton, tois, tous. We've got some nice masculine plural articles that are sticking with us, right? Those look like second declension endings, right? The noun endings we've already learned, because they are, but they stick with us no matter what declension we're in. We use the same set of articles. So really helpful to remind you that hoi, it's hoi despotai, that is the male leaders, bosses, masters, right? And the feminines the singulars rather, look just like the feminine singulars in the accusative and the dative. despote and despotain. Those are exactly the same, again, with the masculine articles. And why this is distinct, or presented as distinct, is because of the nominative and genitive singular. So you get nominative and genitive singulars here that are somewhat assimilated to the second declension ones you've already learned. We get despotes rather than despote. So we'd expect despote as our feminine singular nominative ending of the first declension, but we get despotes instead, which is a little bit assimilated to that Omicron sigma ending you're already familiar with. And despotu, of course, is just the masculine singular from second declension. And notice despotu is used, perhaps, because the genitive singular for a first declension is usually eta sigma, and they've used that there for the nominative, right? So what you want to do is you want to write all of these down and look at them and look for the ambiguities and look for where there might be confusion, and thank the Greeks for using definite articles as often as they do. So here's the full declension of a masculine first declension that uses alpha instead of eta, just like the other first declensions, so totally predictable. And then there's this snuck in little line right here, which is you've already learned a bunch of second declension nouns, and every noun we've seen so far has been masculine, right? All either masculine or neuter, right? Agras, or what is it? Arutron, the plow. Those have all been masculine and neuter. There are second declension feminines, like he hadas. They're identical in spelling to the masculine. Unlike the first declension, you don't have a special spelling for masculine versus feminine. The masculine spelling is the same as the feminine spelling in the second declension group. How do you know it's feminine? It's the article. He hadas, not ha hadas. He Nasos, the island, not ha Nasos. Indistinguishable otherwise from masculine. And this will be important because, of course, as we've seen, the article doesn't always appear right next to the noun. So it's important to remember that they go together. And as we've seen, adjectives have to match their nouns. So if you want to say this is a beautiful road, this is not you can't say, hey, kalos hodas. You have to say, hey, kale hodas. You have to use a feminine singular nominative adjective to match this feminine singular nominative noun, even though it's going to look different. That will be tricky. So, adjectives, while we're on the subject. You can take a break, you can pause me anytime. Adjectives have to be able to match with a noun of any gender, case, or number, right? You can call anything you want beautiful. So, they have to exist in all three genders, in all three genders, in all the cases, and obviously both the singulars and plurals. They don't have to exist in all declensions. The syntax does not care about declensions. So kalos is going to be used for masculine nouns regardless of declension. That is the masculine adjective for this. That is the masculine singular nominative for this adjective. We'll learn there are other kinds of adjectives that belong to other declensions, but this is what we call a 2-1-2 adjective. That means anytime you want to call something beautiful, you're going to use the word beautiful in its second declension for the masculine, in the first declension for the feminine, and the second declension for the neuter. It's a 2-1-2. That is second declension adjective masculine, first declension feminine, second declension neuter. 2-1-2 adjective, referring to which declension corresponds to which gender. Which means if we're talking about a road, we're going to use this set of endings. Oh, that didn't work. We're going to use the feminine, first declension feminine endings if we want to talk about a beautiful road. If we're talking about a field, well, it looks quite nice, right? We can use second declension masculines, which will happen to match in that case. But if we're talking about a first declension feminine with the eta sigma ending, it's going to be matched with a masculine second declension here. So here's the takeaway. That felt like a bunch of things, and you can go back and rewatch it and read it and get clarity on it. The takeaway is that adjectives need to match their noun in case, gender, and number. But that does not mean they're going to look the same. Because as we've seen, we can have first declension masculines and second declension masculines that look different. And adjectives do not match their noun in declension. They only match in case, gender, and number. They have stable or fixed declensions. Calles, beautiful calle, where'd it go? Looks like that no matter what noun it's modifying. These are all the forms of calle, or kalos. It always just looks like this. Which means your nouns can belong to any spelling group, and the adjective matching it is going to look the same, which means you have to pay attention not to the spelling of the ending, per se, but to what that spelling communicates about case, gender, and number. And you match the adjective and the noun on that basis. Okay? That's important. Long discussion of accenting. Do read it. It'll be interesting. Don't sweat it. What you want to sweat is the stuff I've described to you today. By the time you're done going over this material and practicing it, you should know how to form both a feminine and a masculine first declension noun, how to form and recognize that, as well as a masculine, feminine, and neuter second declension noun. There's a tiny little paragraph about the feminine second declension, and that's kind of nice because it's identical. It's kind of nice until it trips you up because it doesn't look at all feminine. You have to really train yourself. Oh, there are just a few, and they are very rare. There are not many second declension feminines, just a couple. Hodos, road is perhaps the most common. So there are a few, and they look like that. So you can now do masculine and feminine neuter, and masculine and feminine first declensions, and masculine, feminine, and neuter second declensions. By the end of this chapter. And you know all your articles, and you finally learned what a contract verb was. Good luck.